Even before that, I want to just say a few words about making the most of natural light. We've had to put the blinds down or across just now because there is plenty of natural light coming through. When I gave this presentation on Tuesday, we were in a pretty much an underground room at the Alex Ferguson suite in Aberdeen, and no windows whatsoever. But there's a few kind of no-brainer things to do. Firstly, ensuring your windows are clean. Cleaning them's one thing, ensuring they stay clean is another. It means instituting a routine or having a maintenance contract. I think the most useful aspect of this is really when you've got skylights. And if you've got in particular a warehouse, I love walking into warehouses that are naturally lit from the roof. The quality of light is just much better than artificial light. But it's a professional job, and somebody's got to get up there on a pretty regular basis, especially if there are trees around, to ensure that those skylights remain clean. And I'm going to link that straight through to some of the lighting control strategies that we're going to be talking about, because that'll be linked to daylighting. Secondly, again, it's a fairly obvious one, but removing furniture and other obstructions from windows. Quite common to see bookcases cutting across some of them, chopping down your natural light. It's not the case in the room we're in now, but I very commonly see blinds mounted within a reveal, within a window reveal. So when they are lifted, they are still taking up a proportion, sometimes 10, sometimes 20% of the available window space. Same with curtains, if you have any of those in a non-domestic environment. And fourthly, we can also make the best of natural light in working spaces if we put desks and other tasks near windows. But we have to think about glare. And in the diagram you've got there, you have desks set at right angles to the windows. If you're facing a window with your monitor facing you, you then have too much light behind you, and that can be a problem. If you have your back to the window, then the window will reflect, or the light coming in through the window will reflect on your monitor, and that will give you a problem as well. So right angles to the window is probably the best, and of course the light level will vary during the course of the day. The reason I'm talking about lighting control before lamp replacement is that in a commercial environment, no one has clear responsibility for lighting control. The more you automate, the better. And that can even be done in a domestic environment. But I would say that more energy is usually saved through lighting control measures than through lamp replacement. And I'll illustrate that. The three main types of lighting control that we can use in this kind of environment are presence detection, timers, and daylight sensors, also known as photocells. You've essentially got two types in use at the moment. You've got PIR and microwave. But I've also put a picture there in the middle of a PIR with a manual override, and that's particularly useful, let's say, in meeting rooms where you actually need to switch off the lights in order to be able to see a presentation clearly. Or if you want them on for some reason when the PIR has not kicked in. So passive infrared works on movement, whereas microwave works on heat. And increasingly now we're seeing lights with microwave sensors built in, and that can be a particularly useful strategy, let's say in toilets, where you've got, as long as you've got a live rather than simply a switched live at the point of light, and you can simply replace a light unit with a microwave integral lighting unit. So generally speaking, we have the switching and the control separate from the light emitter, but in that case they can be combined. Presence detection is ideal for intermittently occupied areas. Now WCs are the most obvious one of these, but they're not the only one. Storerooms are a particularly good one, and by storerooms I also mean refrigerated storerooms, and it's very common to walk into storerooms and just find the lights on permanently, but they're absolutely ideal for PIR. And you can see we've got a storage area in the worked example that we're using today. Corridors are another one. I'm not a great fan of corridors being in darkness, I would stress. And increasingly now I'm seeing a situation where you have a minimal level of permanent lighting in a corridor, but as you walk down it, a series of PIRs kick in the full lighting as you go. So you can actually see your way down to the end of the corridor before you've stepped into it, but you get full lighting as you walk down. And people are very reluctant to walk into what initially looks like a dark corridor. And if you say it's whatever you want to try and find is down the end of that corridor, and if it's already dark, it's going to be a problem to get people to go down there. Meeting rooms, again, a very obvious intermittently occupied space. We do get problems with some PIRs if they're not correctly positioned. They may well kick on as you go into the room, but you don't want them switching off halfway through a meeting. And I put a common mistake setting the controls too short on PIRs. I made that mistake myself. I built some eco houses in Somerset about a decade ago, and elderly gentleman spending a long time in the bathroom suddenly found himself in darkness, and we can't have that sort of thing going on. So the controls have got to be set correctly. They've got to be set safely. Daylight sensors are, I think we're most familiar with these for external lighting, but there's no reason whatsoever why they shouldn't be used in interior locations as well. There is a bank of lights in this room running alongside the window, and I'm quite certain that if you turn them on, you wouldn't notice any difference whatsoever in the light level today, even with the blinds there. There is that much available daylight. In order for that to be effective, it requires appropriate zoning of lights. Now, again, I've used our kind of notional office room just to illustrate that in this room, you'd actually need 3 different lighting groups in order for daylight sensing to work effectively. So the 2 banks of lights adjacent to the windows would be appropriate for daylight control, whereas a bank of lights running up the centre of the room would not be subject to so much daylight coming in. Of course, the sun is going to move during the course of the day. I haven't put a northerly on this map, but any side of the building is going to have more or less light in the morning than it is in the afternoon. So there is sometimes some rewiring to be done. Fortunately for us all, in commercial environments, the lights are not usually buried in joists. They're not normally plastered into the walls. Many of the cables are accessible. Not always. Sometimes they're in forms of trunking which can't easily be accessed. But generally speaking, it is a lot more accessible in a non-domestic environment. I just want to give you a brief worked example of how we can look at savings in a single shift factory by changing WC lighting. Now, the present situation is that the first person in switches the lights off, and they get switched off at the end of the day by the security guard. Let's assume they're operating 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year. We don't have bank holidays in this company. 20 employees visiting one facility, by which I mean either the male or the female. If you catch them visiting both, there's a problem. On average, 2.5 times a day, and there are arguments for raising or lowering that figure of 2.5 times per day, but for the sake of argument, we'll run with that. So the first thing that changes from the existing situation of, say, 8 lamps to the new is, because they're only visiting one of those 2 facilities, you're immediately down to 4 lamps operating. There's no change in the wattage of each lamp. We haven't done anything to the lamps themselves, but the total wattage drops down from 400 to 200. Simples. The operating hours per annum is a little bit more complicated to calculate. You can see a 5/60 in the middle of there. That's your 5 minutes. If you put a PIR operating for 5 minutes every time somebody walks in the room. 50 visits a day, that's 20 employees going 2.5 times a day, times 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, gives you a total operating hours which drops from 2,500 down to just over 1,000. The total kilowatt hours per year has gone down to almost a fifth. So even though the operating hours have gone down by half, we've got to remember that also the total wattage has gone down by a half. So the total gain is pretty substantial. We've gone from 130 down to £27 a year, which gives you a saving of £103 per annum. So that's the basics of how we work out the savings on introducing lighting controls, be they daylight savings, daylight control or PIR.